Number 1. Brucellosis. In a cave system at Sterkfontein in South Africa, a fossil spine sits locked in ancient rock, and one of its vertebrae is pitted and eaten away by something that was alive long before we were. The specimen is called STW-431. It belonged to Australopithecus africanus, and it is roughly 2.4 million years old. When Ruggiero D'Anastasio and Luigi Capasso examined those lumbar lesions, they concluded the damage matched brucellosis. If they are right, this is very close to the oldest evidence of a specific disease anywhere in the human family tree. It also tells us something intimate. To catch brucellosis, this creature almost certainly ate the raw meat or marrow of an infected animal. The infection is a fingerprint of the moment our ancestors leaned harder into eating flesh. The organism responsible is Brucella, a group of tiny gram-negative bacteria that do something clever and cruel. They climb inside the very immune cells sent to destroy them, and they live there. That hiding place is why the disease comes back again and again, and why it is so hard to clear. Humans catch it the same way that hominin did from animals. Unpasteurized milk, soft cheese, and close contact with infected sheep, goats, cattle, pigs, and camels all carry it. History knew it under many names: Malta fever, Mediterranean fever, undulant fever, for the way the temperature rises and falls in slow waves. A British Army surgeon named David Bruce isolated the bacterium on the island of Malta in 1887, and the genus carries his name. In 1905, a Maltese scientist, Themistocles Zamet, proved that goat milk was carrying it through the garrison. The illness itself is grinding. Undulant fevers, drenching night sweats with a strange musty odor, aching joints, and deep pain in the spine. That last detail matters because brucellosis loves the sacroiliac joints and the vertebrae, which is exactly what we see pitted into the fossil. This is not a disease of the deep past that politely stayed there. Today there are still around 500,000 new human cases reported every single year, and the true number is almost certainly higher. It is one of the most common laboratory-acquired infections in the world, because it takes only a handful of bacteria to start an infection. It was even among the first agents the early United States biological weapons program turned into a weapon. There is genuine scientific argument here. Some researchers question whether those marks on STW-431 are really brucellosis or some other spinal disease entirely, and the debate is a live one in paleopathology. What is not in doubt is that the disease is still with us. Brucella DNA has since been recovered from Bronze Age and Roman skeletons and from a 700-year-old body in Sardinia, so the infection has tracked us across the whole span of settled history. The Neolithic Revolution, when people first began to herd and to milk animals every day, opened the door wide, putting humans in constant contact with the milk and the birthing fluids that carry it. Even now, treatment demands weeks of combined antibiotics, often doxycycline with rifampicin or streptomycin, for 6 weeks or more, and relapse is common because the bacterium is so well hidden. There is no safe, effective human vaccine, so control depends entirely on vaccinating and culling animals. And here's the part that should unsettle you. In wealthy countries where this had almost vanished, the fashion for raw milk and artisanal unpasteurized cheese is quietly reopening the door. A sickness that marked the spine of a creature 2.5 million years dead is riding back into modern kitchens on a wellness trend. Number 2, Leishmaniasis. Inside a tomb from the Egyptian Middle Kingdom, wrapped in linen and dried by 4,000 years, a body still carries the genetic signature of the thing that may have helped kill it. In 2006, a team including Albert Zink recovered the DNA of the parasite Leishmania donovani from Egyptian and Nubian mummies dated to roughly 2050 to 1650 before the Common Era. The parasite was already ancient then, and it is still hunting now. It travels by the bite of the female sandfly, an insect barely 2 to 3 millimeters long, silent and active at dusk. That tiny bite delivers a single-celled parasite that takes 3 terrible forms. The cutaneous form carves open ulcers in the skin. The mucocutaneous form eats away the soft tissue of the nose, mouth, and throat, leaving faces hollowed out. And the visceral form, called cholera, meaning black fever, attacks the liver, spleen, and bone marrow, swelling the organs, wasting the body, and killing almost everyone it touches if untreated. The disease is written across human history under a dozen local names: the Aleppo boil, the Baghdad boil, the Delhi sore, the Jericho buttons. In Peru and Ecuador, pottery from the Moche and Chimu cultures, made in the first millennium of the Common Era, appears to show the ruined faces of the mucocutaneous form. William Leishman and Charles Donovan identified the parasite in 1903, and Ronald Ross gave it the name Leishmania. Its lineage runs almost unimaginably deep, and sandflies carrying Leishmania parasites have been found preserved in amber, roughly 100 million years old, from the age of the dinosaurs. And because the parasite hides in dogs, rodents, and hyraxes, as well as humans, wiping it out is effectively impossible. Every year there are between 700,000 and 1 million new cases across around 90 countries. The World Health Organization lists it among the neglected tropical diseases, the illnesses of the very poorest people, the ones the world looks away from. War and displacement set it loose. Major epidemics followed the conflicts in Sudan, in Syria, in Afghanistan, because the disease thrives where order collapses. Infection with HIV makes the visceral form far deadlier and far harder to treat. The drugs are grim, old antimony compounds that are toxic in their own right, along with amphotericin B and a newer pill called miltefosine, and resistance is already rising in South Asia. There is also a live scientific argument about where the genus first arose, whether in the Old World, the New World, or the ancient supercontinent of Gondwana. Meanwhile, the world is changing in the parasite's favor. Climate change and deforestation are pushing the sandfly into new territory, including southern Europe and the southern United States, states like Texas and Oklahoma. And the scars it leaves, especially on the face, are permanent, marking survivors for life and carrying a heavy social stigma. Here is the stake. This Bronze Age parasite came roaring back into Western awareness in the 2000s when soldiers deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan returned home with the Baghdad boil eating at their skin. A disease that infected the pharaohs was simply waiting in the rubble of a modern war. Number 3. Syphilis. On a museum shelf sits a human skull, its surface pitted and cratered with a scarring the specialists call caries sicca, and the argument over which continent that skull came from has run for 500 years. Syphilis is caused by a corkscrew-shaped bacterium, Treponema pallidum, and it belongs to a family of 4 related diseases: syphilis, yaws, Bejel, and Pinta. The most famous origin story is the Columbian hypothesis. It says the disease was carried back from the Americas by the returning crews of Columbus, then exploded across Europe in 1495, first among French troops besieging Naples, which is why it was long called the French disease. But there is a rival idea, the pre-Columbian hypothesis, which holds that treponemal disease already lived in the Old World long before 1493, misread as leprosy or something else. In 2008, a phylogenetic study led by Kristen Harper found that the venereal sexually transmitted form of syphilis appeared to be the most recently evolved, which fits a New World origin for that particular strain. And yet, here is where the case reopens. In 2020, work led by Verena Schunemann pulled Treponema pallidum DNA from early modern European skeletons, and a scattering of European bones that seem to predate 1493 keep the fight alive. The disease leaves unmistakable marks: pitted skulls, curved saber shin bones, and in children infected before birth, notched Hutchinson's teeth. Left alone, syphilis moves through stages: a first sore, a second rash, a hidden latent phase, and then a destructive final act that attacks the bones, the heart, and the brain, where it can cause insanity and death. Fritz Schouten and Erich Hoffmann identified the cause in 1905, and the Wassermann blood test followed in 1906, the first way to screen for it. Paul Ehrlich's arsenic drug Salvarsan in 1910 was the first real chemical cure, the original magic bullet, and penicillin from the 1940s finished the job. One of the 4 treponemal diseases, yaws, a disfiguring infection of skin and bone spread by simple skin contact in the humid tropics, is now an active target for global eradication. But the story also holds an atrocity. The Tuskegee study, running from 1932 to 1972, deliberately withheld penicillin from black American men so that researchers could watch the disease progress. Because the 4 treponeme bacteria look identical under a microscope, separating ancient yaws from ancient syphilis in old bones is genuinely difficult, which is exactly why the origin debate refuses to die. And this is not a solved problem sealed in the past. Syphilis is surging right now. In the United States, congenital syphilis passed from mother to baby rose more than tenfold in a single decade, with over 3,700 cases in 2022 alone. A disease we thought we had beaten in 1943 is climbing back, and it is doing it through newborns. Number 4. Trachoma. Imagine an eyelid slowly turning inward until the lashes themselves drag across the surface of the eye, scraping the cornea a little more with every single blink, until the world goes white. That is trachoma, and it is the leading infectious cause of blindness on Earth. It is caused by repeated infection with the bacterium Chlamydia trachomatis, and it is one of the oldest diseases we can name. It appears in the Ebers Papyrus of Ancient Egypt, written around 1550 before the Common Era, which already described treatments for interned lashes. The name comes from the Greek word for rough, describing the pebbled cobblestone follicles that form under the lid. The mechanism is a slow torture. Each new infection scars the inside of the eyelid a little more. The scarred lid contracts and curls, dragging the lashes inward, and those lashes then rasp against the cornea until it clouds over and blinds. It spreads through discharge from the eyes and nose, on fingers, on shared cloths, and on the bodies of flies that seek out the moisture of the eye. Physicians across the ancient world, Celsus in Rome, Hippocrates in Greece, Sushruti in India, and later Islamic scholars, all describe the eye and the surgery to fix the lashes. When Napoleon's army invaded Egypt at the very end of the 1700s, it carried military ophthalmia back into Europe. A century later, inspectors at Ellis Island used little button hooks to flip immigrants' eyelids and check for the telltale follicles, and the disease was a common reason to be turned away. Today, it still blinds. Around 1.5 million people are blind or visually impaired from trachoma, and roughly 125 million live in areas where it is endemic. The World Health Organization fights it with a strategy called SAFE for surgery, antibiotics, facial cleanliness, and environmental improvement, and mass treatment with the antibiotic azithromycin, donated for the purpose, sits at its heart. It works. Countries including Ghana, Mexico, Morocco, and Cambodia have now been certified as having eliminated trachoma as a public health problem, and that success reveals the real nature of the disease. Trachoma is a disease of poverty. It follows water scarcity, crowding, and the lack of latrines that let the flies breed. Women are blinded up to 4 times as often as men, because they spend more time close to infected children. The bacterium behind it is an obligate intracellular organism unable to live outside our cells, cycling between 2 forms as it spreads. It was once endemic across Europe and North America too, and it retreated there only in the 20th century as clean water and rising living standards arrived. The blindness, once it comes, cannot be reversed. Surgery can only stop it getting worse. Here's what should stay with you. This is a disease first written down 3,500 years ago, one we know exactly how to stop. And it still steals the sight of millions of people, for no better reason than that clean water and a clean face remain out of their reach. Number 5. Toxoplasmosis. A rat that should be terrified creeps toward the scent of cat, drawn rather than repelled, walking calmly toward the thing that will kill it, because a parasite in its brain has quietly rewritten its fear. The parasite is Toxoplasma gondii, and it is one of the most successful organisms alive. Somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of every human being on the planet carries it. It can only complete its full life cycle inside the body of a cat, so the entire biology of this parasite is built around getting back into a cat. Humans and other warm-blooded animals are just way stations. We catch it from microscopic eggs in soil, water, or cat litter, or from cysts in undercooked meat. And once inside, it forms dormant cysts that settle by preference in the brain and the muscle, and it stays for life. The mind-bending part was demonstrated by Manuel Berdoy, Joanne Webster, and colleagues in the year 2000. Infected rodents lose their instinctive fear of cat odor and may even be drawn to it, which makes them far more likely to be caught and eaten, delivering the parasite home. How it does this is still being unraveled, but the clues point to the brain's dopamine system, to cysts forming in the fear-processing amygdala, and, remarkably, to the parasite carrying its own gene for an enzyme that helps make dopamine. And here the science becomes genuinely contested. The researcher Jaroslav Flieger has argued that latent infection subtly changes human personality, slows reaction times, and raises the risk of traffic accidents, and some studies have tried to link it to schizophrenia. None of this is proven, and it should be held carefully, but the mere possibility is unsettling. The parasite's origins run deep, its wider group tracing back hundreds of millions of years, its spread bound up with the rise and radiation of the cat family. The everyday dangers are real and not in doubt. A first infection during pregnancy can cause miscarriage, water on the brain, calcium deposits in the infant's brain, and blindness, which is exactly why pregnant people are warned away from cat litter and raw meat. In people with weakened immune systems, from AIDS or transplant drugs, dormant cysts can reawaken and cause a lethal brain infection. It is also a leading infectious cause of disease at the back of the eye. The parasite even reaches the ocean, its eggs washing to sea and killing sea otters and dolphins, a measure of how far it can travel. The parasite was first identified in 1908 by Charles Nicole and Louis Monceau in a small North African rodent, and it is now a workhorse of laboratory science, a model for how intracellular parasites live. No drug can clear the dormant cyst. Treatment only touches the active parasite. Infection rates swing wildly around the world, from under 10% in parts of Asia to over 60% in parts of Latin America and Europe, tracking what people eat and how they live. Here is the stake, and it is a strange one. A microscopic parasite that has been shown to steer the behavior of mammals is right now sitting quietly in the brains of perhaps a third of the people watching this. Number 6. Epidemic Typhus. Beneath the construction site in Vilnius in Lithuania, workers uncovered a mass grave packed with the bones of soldiers, and when scientists drilled into the teeth of Napoleon's dead, the pulp still held the bacteria that had helped destroy his army. The researcher Didier Raoult and his colleagues found the DNA of Rickettsia prowazekii, the cause of epidemic typhus, and of the trench fever bacterium in the dental pulp of men from the Grande Armée's catastrophic retreat from Russia in 1812. Now, this is not the same disease as typhoid fever, despite the shared name. Typhus is carried by the human body louse, and the way it spreads is grotesque. The louse defecates as it feeds, and when the victim scratches, they rub the infected louse droppings into the bite. It is a disease of crowding, cold, and filth, which is why history knew it as jail fever, camp fever, and war fever. It has been proposed, though it is still argued, as a candidate for the plague of Athens in 430 before the Common Era. Strangely, the bacterium that causes it is genetically close to the ancient ancestor of the mitochondrion, the power plant inside our own cells, a hint at how deep the roots of these intracellular bacteria go. Typhus killed on an almost incomprehensible scale, an estimated 3 million people in Russia and Eastern Europe during and after the First World War. Anne Frank and her sister Margot are believed to have died of it at the Bergen-Belsen camp in 1945. The illness brings sudden fever, a splitting headache, a spreading rash, and a clouded, delirious mind, and the name itself comes from the Greek word for smoke or haze. Untreated, it kills between 10 and 40% of its victims, and more of the old. Charles Nicole won the Nobel Prize in 1928 for proving the louse carried it. The bacterium is named for two scientists, Howard Ricketts and Stanislaus von Prowazek, both of whom died of typhus while studying it. And it was Henrique Rochi Lima who gave it that name in their memory. There is one more grim footnote to its power. During the Second World War, a spraying of the insecticide DDT halted a major typhus outbreak in Naples in 1943 and 44, one of the first times a chemical was used to stop an epidemic in its tracks. During the Second World War, Rudolf Weigel grew a vaccine by rearing infected lice and used his laboratory in Lviv to shelter people from the Nazis. There's even a lingering form called Brill-Zinsser disease that can flare up years later when immunity fades. In the eastern United States, flying squirrels quietly carry the bacterium and cause occasional cases even now, and a milder cousin, marine typhus, spread by rat fleas, still turns up along the Gulf Coast. There is still real debate about what truly caused the plague of Athens, with typhus, typhoid, a viral illness, and smallpox all proposed. Today the cure is almost embarrassingly simple, the antibiotic doxycycline, often in a short course. And yet here is the stake. Typhus still returns among homeless populations and in war zones, wherever human beings are packed together, cold and unable to wash. It has always been a disease that follows human misery, and misery has never gone away. Number 7. Herpes Simplex. Around 6 million years ago, as the ancestors of humans and chimpanzees split apart into separate lineages, a virus split with them, quietly branching into a version that would ride with us ever after. That virus is Herpes Simplex type 1, a large DNA virus best known for cold sores, and it has been our companion for longer than our species has existed. Herpes viruses have co-evolved with their hosts for hundreds of millions of years. The simplex lineage divided from the ancestor of the related type 2 virus around 6 million years ago, tracking the human-chimp divergence itself. In 2014, work led by Joel Wertheim dated the most recent common ancestor of human herpes simplex 1 to the emergence of modern humans, spreading out of Africa as we did. And in 2022, a study led by Miriam Goelil and Charlotte Holdcroft sequenced herpes genomes from human remains up to around 1,500 years old, including an Anglo-Saxon burial, the oldest herpes genomes ever recovered. The researchers even floated a speculative idea that a surge in the virus's diversity in the Bronze Age might be tied to the cultural rise of kissing. The virus's reach today is staggering. The World Health Organization estimates that about 3.8 billion people under the age of 50, roughly 2/3 of that population, carry herpes simplex 1, making it one of the most common infections on the entire planet. Most people catch it in early childhood from contact with saliva or a sore, and for most, it is a mild, occasional nuisance, but it never leaves. It retreats into the nerve bundles of the face and lies dormant, reactivating for the rest of your life whenever stress, illness, or sunlight lowers your guard. And it is not always mild. It can cause a rare but devastating brain infection, and it is a leading infectious cause of blindness through damage to the cornea. Caught by a newborn during birth, it can be fatal. There is also a genuinely contested and disturbing frontier here. Some researchers, notably Ruth Hitchcock, argue that reactivated herpes virus in the brain may contribute to Alzheimer's disease, feeding the formation of the plaques that clog the aging brain. It is a hypothesis hotly debated and unproven, but under serious investigation. The very name comes from the Greek word to creep, for the way the sores spread, and Greek physicians described exactly that. The Roman Emperor Tiberius is said to have banned kissing at public ceremonies to stop an outbreak of cold sores. Antiviral drugs, beginning with acyclovir from the team of Gertrude Elion in the late 1970s, can suppress the outbreaks, but nothing can reach the dormant virus hiding in the nerves. And there is no vaccine and no cure. In wealthy countries, it is now becoming a growing cause of genital herpes too, as fewer children catch it early and first exposure shifts to adulthood. The intimacy of herpes viruses with animal life runs so deep that nearly every animal lineage carries a herpes virus of its own. Here is the stake. This ancient passenger, carried by most of humanity and older than humanity itself, may not be harmless at all. It may be quietly shaping the way our brains break down as we grow old. Number 8. Typhoid fever. In a mass burial pit at Kerameikos, in ancient Athens, lay the victims of a plague that helped bring a golden age to its knees. And thousands of years later, a single tooth pulled from that pit still held a clue to what killed them. In 2006, a study led by Manolis Papagrigorakis recovered DNA resembling Salmonella typhi from the dental pulp of victims dated to the plague of Athens around 430 before the Common Era. That plague killed perhaps 75 to 100,000 people and helped doom Athens in its war with Sparta, and the historian Thucydides left a chilling eyewitness account of it. Typhoid is caused by Salmonella enterica of the type typhi, a bacterium that lives only in humans, and it spreads by the fecal-oral route. through food and water fouled with human waste. Its symptoms build like a staircase, a fever climbing step by step, abdominal pain, rose-colored spots on the trunk, crushing exhaustion, and in the worst cases, the intestines perforate and bleed. Untreated, it kills 10 to 20% of its victims. With antibiotics, that falls below 1%. But it is far from gone. There are still an estimated 9 million cases and over 100,000 deaths every year, concentrated in South Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. The disease gave us one of the most famous names in the history of medicine, Typhoid Mary. Mary Mallon was an asymptomatic carrier, a cook in early 1900s New York who infected dozens of people while feeling perfectly well, and who was eventually confined for nearly 3 decades. Chronic carriers like her harbored the bacteria in the gallbladder and shed them for years. For a long time, typhoid and typhus were confused as one fever, until physicians like William Budd separated them in the 19th century, and Almroth Wright's vaccine in the 1890s went on to save countless soldiers in the First World War. It is worth saying that the Athens DNA finding is genuinely disputed among researchers who study ancient disease, part of a wider argument about what that plague really was. Today, the deeper fear is not the ancient bacterium, but the new one. Extensively drug-resistant typhoid emerged in Pakistan from 2016, resistant to nearly all the oral antibiotics we relied on. Genomic studies have tracked a single drug-resistant lineage, known as H58, spreading across Asia and Africa, and a related bacterium, Salmonella aiperatiffi, causes a similar enteric fever alongside it. New conjugate vaccines that can be given to young children are now being rolled out to fight back. In the 1898 Spanish-American War, more American soldiers died of typhoid in camp than in battle, a fact that forced a revolution in sanitation. Here's the stake. An ancient disease of dirty water, one we had largely tamed with clean water and antibiotics, is being made newly dangerous, its most resistant strain slipping beyond the reach of the drugs that used to cure it. Number 9. Cholera. A person healthy at breakfast can be dead by nightfall, drained of liters of fluid an hour, dying of thirst, while lying in a flood of their own making. That is cholera, and it works with terrifying speed. It is caused by a comma-shaped bacterium, Vibrio cholerae, whose toxin hijacks the cells of the gut and forces them to pour out water, producing the pale rice water stool that empties a body in hours. Cholera is ancient in the delta of the Ganges, its historical home in the Indian subcontinent, and descriptions of a cholera-like disease appear in Sanskrit texts and in the writings of Hippocrates, Galen, and the Indian surgeon Sushruta. It was known there for millennia before it ever went global. Since 1817, 7 great pandemics have swept out of that delta and around the world, riding the roots of trade and pilgrimage. It also gave birth to modern epidemiology. In 1854, the physician John Snow traced a deadly London outbreak to a single water pump on Broad Street, arguing against the prevailing belief that disease came from bad air, and proving it came from contaminated water. That same year, Filippo Pacini first identified the Vibrio bacterium, though his work was ignored until Robert Koch popularized the discovery about 30 years later. The disease remains a global killer, with somewhere between 1.3 and 4 million cases, and up to 143,000 deaths a year. But cholera also produced one of the greatest life-saving inventions in medicine, oral rehydration therapy, a simple mixture of salt, sugar, and clean water, refined in the work done in Dhaka and Kolkata, which has saved tens of millions of lives. Its power to explode in a vulnerable population is horrifying. In 2010, cholera was introduced to Haiti by United Nations peacekeepers, and it went on to sicken more than 800,000 people and kill nearly 10,000. In Yemen, a cholera epidemic that began in 2016 amid civil war became the largest in modern recorded history, with more than 2.5 million suspected cases. And it can never be fully eradicated because the bacterium lives naturally in warm, brackish coastal water, clinging to plankton, waiting. The strain driving the current pandemic, called L. tor, is hardier than the classical form and produces more silent carriers, which helps it spread unseen. In the 19th century, cholera tearing through crowded European and American cities drove the great movements to build sewers and clean the water supply, reshaping the modern city itself. Oral vaccines offer temporary protection, and warming seas, and extreme weather are expanding the conditions it loves. Rehydration given in time cuts the death rate to well under 1%, which means that a cholera death is almost always a failure to deliver clean water and simple care. Here's the stake. Cholera is a barometer of collapse. It surges wherever war, poverty, or disaster shatters the systems that keep water clean, from Haiti to Yemen to Sudan. Wherever human order breaks, this ancient bacterium is waiting in the water to rush back in. Number 10. Tetanus. A single spore lies in the soil, dormant, patient, capable of waiting decades in the dirt for the one thing it needs, a wound with no oxygen in it. That spore is Clostridium tetani. And unlike every other disease on this list, tetanus is not passed from person to person. It is delivered by the ground itself. Its spores live in soil, dust, and animal dung all over the world, and can survive for decades. When they enter a deep, airless wound, they wake, multiply, and release tetanospasmin, one of the most powerful toxins known to science, so potent that a few billionths of a gram can kill. The toxin silences the nerve signals that tell muscles to relax, so the muscles seize in relentless, uncontrolled contraction. It begins with lockjaw, a spasm clamping the jaw shut, then a fixed and terrible grin, and then the whole body can arch backward in a violent, rigid spasm. Hippocrates described it in the 5th century before the Common Era, and the Edwin Smith Papyrus of Ancient Egypt, written around 1600 before the Common Era, records a man dying of it after a head wound, making it one of the oldest clinical descriptions of any disease. Its cruelest form takes newborns, when spores enter through the cut stump of the umbilical cord in an unclean birth. And neonatal tetanus still kills tens of thousands of infants. Because those spores are everywhere in the environment, tetanus can never be eradicated. There is nothing to wipe out, only wounds to prevent and people to vaccinate. Arthur Nicolaer found the bacterium in 1884, and Kitasato Shibasaburo grew it in pure culture in 1889. In 1890, Emil von Behring and Kitasato created an antitoxin, a breakthrough that won von Behring the very first Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1901. The toxoid vaccine developed in the 1920s is highly effective, and it is part of the routine childhood shots. Even so, full-blown tetanus still kills 10 to 20% or more of its victims, even with intensive care, because once the toxin has bound, there is little to do but wait it out on a ventilator. Vaccination has driven deaths down from hundreds of thousands a year to somewhere around 35 to 50,000, most of them newborns. And the World Health Organization and UNICEF have pushed hard to eliminate maternal and newborn tetanus by vaccinating pregnant women and promoting clean delivery. Protection is not permanent, though, which is why a booster is needed roughly every 10 years as the immunity from the vaccine slowly fades, and that old warning about rusty nails misses the point. It is not the rust that carries the disease, it is the soil, and the bacterium is a strict anaerobe that thrives in the sealed depths of a puncture wound. Here is the stake. Tetanus is entirely preventable and completely impossible to erase because its reservoir is the very ground beneath our feet. It returns wherever the needle does not reach in war, in poverty, wherever vaccination fails. A killer described 3,500 years ago that is still only ever one dirty wound away. Look back across these 10, and a single pattern emerges. Every one of them survives because it has somewhere to hide, a reservoir it can retreat into and wait. For Brucellosis, Leishmaniasis, and Toxoplasmosis, that reservoir is other animals, which means treating sick people alone can never win, because the disease simply lives on in livestock, in dogs, in rodents, in cats. For tetanus and cholera, the reservoir is the environment itself, the soil and the estuary, older than us and destined to outlast us. For typhoid, trachoma, and cholera, the chain runs person to person through filth. And it is broken not by medicine, but by sanitation, by clean water and a clean face. And for herpes, the hiding place is inside the survivor, the virus lying dormant in the nerves, needing only to wait. Many of these pathogens found their opening in the same event, the Neolithic Revolution, when we began to farm, to herd, to crowd together in permanent settlements, and handed them the conditions to flourish. And their modern resurgences almost always trace to the same handful of accelerants: poverty, war, and displacement. The moments when clean water fails, when people are packed together, when health systems collapse. Now, antibiotic resistance is reversing the gains in extensively drug-resistant typhoid, in Leishmaniasis shrugging off its treatments. This is why the diseases we declared conquered keep coming back. We treated the patients, but we never removed the reservoir. These organisms did not lose to civilization. They learned to live in its cracks, and they have been living there ever since. The frontier ahead is unsettling, and much of it is genuinely unknown. Climate change is pushing the sandfly and the cholera bacterium into new lands, including parts of Europe and North America that thought themselves safe. The question of whether Toxoplasma truly reshapes human behavior remains open, and so does the possibility that herpes helps drive Alzheimer's disease in the aging brain. Even the origin of syphilis, one of the most studied diseases in history, is still an argument without an ending. We have vaccines for only some of these: for tetanus, for typhoid, for cholera, for brucellosis, leishmaniasis, trachoma, toxoplasmosis, herpes, and syphilis. There is still no effective human vaccine at all. And that is the uncomfortable truth running under all of it. These are not relics behind glass. They are living, evolving organisms, still adapting, still probing for the gaps in our defenses, and those defenses, clean water, working vaccines, stable societies, are unevenly shared and easily broken. Deep time is not something safely behind us. It is circulating right now, in our blood, in our soil, and in our water, patient as it has always been. If the deep past still has questions for you, there is another investigation waiting on your screen right now, and subscribing keeps them coming.